Hi, it's Dale Walsh, the poetic warrior of the mental health warriors, presenting straight, sane, and sober, straight from the beautiful downtown Hackensack, New Jersey. And I'm very honored today to have as our guest David Meyers, who is a survivor. He's a fighter. He's been he's been diagnosed as schizoaffective for 23 years, but his story is very compelling, and I'll just let him tell you a little bit about it. But welcome to the show, and thank you for showing up, and hope you enjoy it. So, Dave, it's up to you.
Why, hello. I'm very pleased to be here to be speaking to be representing the mental health warriors and be representing that there is a real way to a better day if you have a mental health condition. If you're, there's a way to feel better. There's a way to get through um, the trouble that comes with any kind of condition. I mean, you may have schizoaffective, you may have depression, you may have schizophrenia, you may have any. No matter how bad it gets, things always get better. I know from my experience, you know, things things always seemed like they were going good, and but then they got bad, and I didn't understand that they were getting bad as they were getting bad. But then, you know, working with a doctor and a psychiatrist and a counselor was the way that really brought me help and peace. I was using my creativity was really the top way that I really was able to work through the devastating effects of schizoaffective and the trouble that I worked through. Gaining suffering the problems I did. So
Well, creativity has been very important in my own recovery. Uh, I have an archive of 4,000 poems that I've written since 1985, and creativity and artistry. I see you have art. That's your art behind you, right?
yeah, I actually created that in our therapy program at a program with the Office of Mental Health in 2016. I never really knew I had any experience and I had any real skill at making art until I sat down in our therapy program and I was able to just experiment. And the more I experimented, the more I sort of, learned about my own emotions, and I was able to create things which, were able to represent how I felt. And sometimes they don't look like anything; they might just be, nice sketches of just my emotions, like the one behind me. Other times they might look more of things in real life. Like I drew something that was a bonfire once, and it was very emotional, but it was something that really drew the attention of some people who felt that it reminded them of a place in their history, a time in their history. So using art in order to uh, get and like access the past is a really wonderful way to heal and get through the trauma that I felt. So
Well, you cover a big spectrum of creative arts and expository arts. I know that you paint and you recently like had a lot of articles published about mental health and mental illness, and not just about your experience but about the whole mental health system. And one thing that I wanted to talk to you about. Well, before I go on, do you mind if I just like sort of like quote your biography and tell the folks about you a little bit, Dave?
yeah, that'd be great. I'm a little nervous. I'm kind of stumbling over my own words, but it's really wonderful to
Well,
have this opportunity.
I'll put you at ease,
Yeah,
uh,
that's cool. So
but basically, Dave has been living with schizoaffective for 23 years. he's not only got that condition, but he also had an accident where he was in a coma for a month, and he had to basically relearn how to live his whole life. He's a real fight, and so he's not only like I mean his mental illness is one part of it, but there's also in the accident he suffered traumatic prefrontal brain trauma, and so he sees he's been through the whole system, and he lived in group apartments and supervised apartments for what 8 to 10 years, Dave, or
It would have been about well, I had to be in the state hospital for what I experienced because it was so extreme, and after that, they felt that the best place for me was a group home, and from that point on, they moved me to through different levels, and I could learn skills at each level that helped me survive where I'm at now, but in the end, it really mattered the fact that I wanted to have, I had my own personal drive for freedom, that I wanted to have an open life and be a real character in society. And I had the self determination. And it was hard a lot because I felt that, staff was very much trying to tell me the way that I had to be since I had a mental health condition, and I had to kind of act a certain way, do a certain thing. I only be capable of certain things, and it gets back to the stigma. I feel, and it was hard a lot of the time, but eventually I was able to move on to where I'm at now. It wasn't, and it was very abrupt change. I had been in a more I had been in more supervised housing for like 10 years, and all of a sudden I had nobody really at all, because these were programs where there was like 20 other, there was like 100 other people in them, at least 100 150. So and it seems like ironically there's a lot more recovery, you know since, because sometimes the drive to move on, that actually creates a really good energy to be independent. That is it's a coping skill, more or less, that has helped me get through the symptoms that kind of are behind the condition of schizoaffective, like paranoia or delusions. Sometimes it's better just to feel independent and capable on my own, like being able to produce that art behind me, or being able to have made the blogs that I have. And sometimes it takes that amount of initiative and just saying, what, I don't need to listen to what everybody has to say for me. And I had the capability. I had my own inherent skill,
right,
to do it on my own, because people can tell you to know one of the things that you should be doing, but sometimes it takes that burst of insight to say, I have what it takes. Because I found that if I kept on following what people said that I should do, I would just have more problems. I would have lots of issues. I'd have anger problems. I have being nervous. I wouldn't be able to speak straight. And I had to go through, speech therapy in order to talk straight and all that stuff. I know they say that was because of my traumatic brain injury. Perhaps I had to go through speech therapy, but a lot of it was just maybe being upset with the way things were, And I
right.
think it was sometimes it's hard to know when something is a symptom, if it's honestly really from the condition, or if it's from just maybe needing some self growth. It's hard to know. So,
Well,
but
I found in my own case that I was in a private psychiatric program for 5 years, and I found that I don't know if this is the case with you, but first off, let me say I admire the way you have pursued your dream of freedom, and you're actually in your own apartment, you're self-sustaining, and but I found, it took me 5.5 years in a intensive psychiatric program before I was ready to do that, but and your journey was even longer. But this is something that I find my mind wandering to, and when it comes to recovery. But did you find that like the constant focus on mental illness and your condition like exacerbated it?
Yeah, I think it did. I mean, I believe in. I mean, I believe in medication. I believe in working through symptoms. I just think that, I mean, the way I think it, a lot of it just came down to people stigmatizing the staff stigmatizing the residents because they would misinterpret a symptom, something they're going through, if they were behaving strangely, and they wouldn't know how to really react to it appropriately because they should understand this is something that's a symptom, but they treated it as if it was a character deficit. So, and so it's really a matter sometimes of being able to accept that, understand that there is that medical aspect, but there also is that the fact that people have a real, need to have that sense of freedom and
Self-worthiness too, right?
yeah. So because I
Well,
mean, understanding the medical aspect can help you. Actually, can give that sense of freedom.
right.
Because if you understand this is normal for somebody with like a schizophrenic diagnosis to be acting in a certain way, because that's kind of what the spectrum kind of presents, then the staff should be appropriate to that. They should understand, and I definitely find that it's I found that there's not always that kind of empathy from people. But on the other hand, I mean, the system did offer great opportunities. There were plenty of times where I was unable to practically do anything for myself. And the fact that there is a system that allowed me to have Social Security and allowed me to a place to live when I was kind of suffering some really bad things. I mean, I'm grateful for that. So it's really it's important to. That's one of the reasons I write the blogs for Mental Health Affairs blog, is because I think other people should have the opportunity to work through a system that's much more efficient and much more empathetic and understanding people, but then also, understand you have the understanding that certain kinds of diagnoses have certain kind of presentations, and that means that the staff needs to work a little bit harder at understanding their own selves so they can take accountability for themselves, but then also understand when somebody is being symptomatic based on what their actual what that person's diagnosis is, rather than
Right,
throw
the
it in their face.
clinical
Well,
experience.
was that
According to their clinical experience.
my
According
there?
according to their clinical experience and how they perceive the condition.
Yeah, but I just think that there needs to be a lot more of a better understanding of. I mean, because a person might not have the right clinical. I mean, somebody that like works at a has like barely has any real training at some of these places, whether it be a psychiatric hospital or residential program, they might not have the education to understand when somebody is if somebody is explaining being acting a certain way, that might be more about their more about what the symptoms are of their diagnosis. So um
Well,
so
you bring up two major subjects which are concerns of the mental health warriors. First is freedom, and how to achieve freedom and normalcy, if that exists. I mean, normalcy is a word that has to be replaced, but
mhm,
the,
yeah,
the the ideal of the the married working child retirement life, which is which is how some people look at what should be done. But for someone who's in a mentally ill state, freedom means something completely different. I remember when I was in my hospitals, people would say, I got to get out of here. I don't deserve to be in here. And that drive towards freedom was a very positive motivation for them to get better.
Yes, and sometimes the drive for freedom kind of transcends always doing what the right thing is. Sometimes it's
Right,
better off to just kind of, if you show symptoms and if they're not always appropriate, then that might be something that it might be representing a struggle that you're going through, and meaning you need to get somewhere different. And I just think that staff needs to understand, or any psychiatrist needs to get, if sometimes, like, it's anger or any other symptom like that, there's a push to move forward. It's not always just meaning that person needs to be, pushed down or kicked out of the program, or maybe it might mean they need more medication, but it might mean that there needs to be a change in the way the treatment is going. It might mean
right.
it might mean they need to have a different person working with them. So
Well, the other big subject that you brought up, which is really the focus of the mental health warriors, is the stigma. And people, I talk about self stigma, family stigma because of my coaching, and also societal stigma. But you also brought up something that I rarely think about, which is staff stigma, and how all the people who are helping, I mean, they're all most of them are very dedicated and really want to help, but they
yes,
they stigmatize the patient just because, well, for a variety of reasons, but one reason is they're so overwhelmed by so many patients these days that they can't take the time to really like delve into a person's self and history, and they just act on precepts rather than on reality. And but if you could say something about staff stigma, that's something I'm very interested in, and I know our listeners are too.
well, staff stigma, meaning, the fact that they might misunderstand because maybe they have their own way of viewing the world, which might not agree with, you know the way that they're seeing things in a given psychiatric situation. Is that what you mean?
Absolutely, that's what I meant. Yes,
Is that kind
yeah,
of what
that's
you're
what I
talking?
was
It's kind
getting
of
at.
like,
Thank
they
you
might.
for
It's kind of
explaining it
they're
more
seeing
clearly.
things in a way that's layered by their experience, but sometimes you need to take yourself out of it and go more by, you're under people
You're freezing a little.
and working with people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I did just freeze, but
Could you repeat what you just
there.
said because you
So I'm
froze?
here.
You froze. So could you repeat what you just said?
Yeah. Um. Well, there's where it's very important to work with people more on than seeing them as displaying their symptoms. I think, although
Right,
displaying the symptoms is very important to see that something could be coming up because they have a diagnosis possibly, but it's still seeing the people as they are. I mean, sometimes understanding that their symptoms can still help you see the person. It can
right,
still help you understand that they're flawed because there might be something going on that they're having that reaction, and just being able to see through that and go through those layers and still be there present, which is one of the things I learned about with peer advocacy. I don't know, that's what goes on. That happens a lot in the United States. They have people who have mental health conditions helping other people with mental health conditions, and that's one thing I got a bit involved with for a few years. I was able to volunteer for the New York State Office of Mental Health, and lead creative writing groups, and you know, I led groups like a smoking cessation because I was a heavy smoker for a while. I smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day, and it was and so one of the first groups I led was smoking cessation, where I helped people take the steps that they had to do to work through how they quitting cigarettes themselves. So that experience was very valuable for me, and then learning how to help people just write a little bit more effectively and creatively. Um, so um, so that was great experience for me when I was with the Office of Mental Health, and I learned a lot about being a peer, and I don't know if there's any peer programs in England, but they're a big thing here, especially in New York State, especially Western New York. Uh, People are trying to understand, like, people, because they have experience, they might be more effective at helping somebody than a trained therapist, because they
Right.
can have more empathy, so.
Well, and then your story about smoking cessation reminds me of my own history. I gave up cigarette. I smoked a pack a day for like 38 years, and I just gave it up cold
Wow.
turkey one night. And but I remember I went to my pulmonologist because I had something she had to look at, and I just casually mentioned. I said, "Yeah, I quit smoking in 2000." This was like 3 years ago, and she said her jaw literally dropped. She goes, "What?" And I'm like going, "Yeah, I quit smoking." And she says, "I have never known anyone with your condition to give up smoking." So if you could like actually get people and I understand because smoking is like the essential pleasure that a lot of schizophrenics have. So to be able to like lead a smoking cessation and creative writing, I mean that's truly admirable. And also I want to also bring up your desire and your drive towards education, because I think your college career began in 2000, and you just persevered and just finished your studies like during COVID, right? Seems like he's frozen. Can you hear me, Dave? Well, we seem to be having some technical difficulties at the moment. Hopefully, his camera will come back on and we'll be able to continue. But uh, I think, let me see. Uh, um, I'm not sure. So hopefully he'll check back in. So let me just. Oh, here we go. So there we go. Add the
Is it my
screen.
Wi? Is that my Wi-Fi or is that yours?
I think it's yours. I didn't go out.
So you didn't go out. Are we on now?
Yeah, we are. You're back.
All right. Well, that's too bad, but yeah, but
So I was
I'm sorry
talking
about that,
about your
everybody.
education.
So
I was talking
what's
about
that?
your education. Do you want to tell the story of how you persevered from starting in 2000 and finishing it during COVID and finishing your studies in multidisciplinary studies?
It's interdisciplinary studies. Yeah. It was pretty intense because I really thought I should study biology. But then because that's what my biology teacher in my senior year of high school had told me I should do. But I really wanted to be a writer. But so I studied biology at Fredonia for a couple years, but then, I end up having some symptoms, and then I end up staying out for a couple years, and, then I ended up going back to school for English. I did English, and I studied that for a couple years, and I just had another break. I just had problems again, and then I ended up having to be hospitalized. I ended up in a very severe situation where I had to, I lost all capacity, and I was in the state hospital, and I came out of it, and then I went back to studying scientific communication, and so I studied that for a while I was like leading groups at the Office of Mental Health, which was cool. And that experience was great. But I just all that time I was dealing with symptoms, and I never finished a degree until I said, well, I'm gonna just finish this up now. I'm gonna write a paper at Empire State College that sums up my studies, and at least I'll get an associate's degree out of it. So that's what I did. So then it was interdisciplinary studies because of all the diversity of things I studied. So
Wow. Well, it took me 11 years to get my degree too. So
yeah,
between my entrance as a freshman and my graduation, it was from 1974 to 1985. So, but I admire your perseverance, and uh, one thing that we often discuss when we're talking among ourselves is mental illness versus mental health. And the idea that mental health implies mental illness is something that's come to be accepted, but they're really two different things, because mental health to me is mindfulness and being strong and being aware and being coherent, and hopefully without many vices and everything, whereas mental illness is a condition of the brain that's a result of a brain chemical imbalance in the brain a lot of the time. Not always, but uh, do you have? I know you have some ideas about the difference.
well, I mean, I think mental health doesn't always emphasize that some people, when they're having major problems, they really need more intensive help. They might need. Some people are not capable of living in the community. They might need to be in the hospital for extended periods of time. And I mean, you start talking about things like, some. I mean, there's some mental health. Some things are a lot more, applicable to people who don't have, or who are not as bound by 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 bad symptoms. And but it seems like, recovery. I think I see mental health as more about recovery, and mental illness is more about the fact that you just need to have that security blanket of a doctor, maybe a hospital, and things like that, just to help, just to make sure that you know you're gonna have um, you're gonna have that you can continue on. Sometimes it's very difficult for some people that are experiencing really bad problems to be able to practically do anything. The fact that because we know that mental illness is a disability, that's what helps to cure the fact that there are group homes when people are not capable of doing it themselves. It helps secure the fact that people get social security, or that there's psychiatrists that prescribe medication that sometimes do a lot of good things for people. And mental health is more about, I think understanding mental health per se is more about empowering meditation, mindfulness, and really living in the moment and being more of an individual that's willing to take responsibility for themselves. So,
Well, uh, just you become very active, well, pretty active, if not very active, in the advocacy for change and mental illness perception and everything. And hey, do you see that we're making progress in that area, or?
well, there seems to have been a lot of progress. I mean, in my time, especially since I was able to pay more attention because of the internet. You know, um, as I've learn more about the internet, learn more what's going on with the internet. There's people that are kind of getting together and kind of saying, we need to sort of change the way we look at these things and we treat people, because mental health really is a human right, and it's more mental health is a human right, and I think the more people communicate about these things, and I think the internet helps a lot. I mean, there's so much information out there, and it's possible to integrate everything and get a better get just a more integrated viewpoint on what you're supposed to do. Like for example, like you using art and or some
Poetry,
play. What was that?
poetry, like I do.
Yeah, well, you do great at the poetry thing. Kind of like when I used to lead creative writing groups, I was helpful for people to create poetry now and then, and so but the thing is, like, a lot of that took place at a psychiatric hospital. So I think the good thing is that there's even hospitals that even they understand, even though they're mostly medically based, they still have they for a while they had a program at the hospital to help people be creative. Like, I gave me the opportunity to lead a creative writing group or things like that, or it was there for people to things there, and also the piece of art behind me was created at the state hospital. Um, so, I think there's studies that show that creativity is good, and then there's also studies that show that men, that medications are positive. So it's
Right.
studies show different things, and it's more about the body of evidence, I think, than just kind of doing something because it just seems right. Sometimes it's more about really understanding all the everything that's out there, and kind of integrating it.
I think that's very true, and I think you're showing your scientific background when you talk about like that.
I guess
So
it does, yeah. That's cool.
so
So you
you
want me to talk? You
yeah,
want me to talk about my science background?
if you want to, yeah, I'm interested.
I mean, I could. I mean, because I mean, it's interesting because yeah, I studied science communication, and I was doing that while leading creative writing groups, and a lot of that time I was actually like having delusions, and I was kind of in a weird state of mind, but I was still managing to lead these groups. And the weird thing about it, when I was like actually more symptomatic with symptoms of schizophrenia, I probably was doing a better job at leading those groups than when I was on, like, more medication. I feel that the less medication I was on, the more creative I was able to be, and and I was also doing good at the science stuff too. So, um, learning about science and the way communication is presented, whether in the form of sentences or in the form of illustrations, and I was learning how to present the information, but I was also experimenting more with the ability to write poetry. I mean, it's just a matter of how you choose how I find that communication can be, whether scientific or creative, is almost just a matter of just the choice of how words are played. Um, I sometimes see a similarity between reading a scientific paper and reading something by like Walt Whitman. I see a bit of a
Right.
similarity there, so.
Well, I think the whole psychiatric paradigm is undergoing a major shift, and we're getting away from the from the belief. I might be wrong, but this is the impression I built through readings and stuff. Is but that we're getting away from the brain alone uh, perception of mental illness to having a much more holistic approach to mental illness and its cure or recovery. Because I've always felt that like environment and genetics to a degree, but environment is extremely important to mental health and to recovery from mental illness. And as I said, when I was in the psychiatric program, it was so focused on like talking about problems all the time that it would drive me nuts. And I ended up going to the
Yeah.
hospital 9 times in 5 years because I
Mm.
just get too claustrophobic from all these people focusing on their issues rather than just living life.
Yeah. Well,
But
sometimes it is good.
I guess the point I'm making is, you would you agree that we need a much more holistic approach to recovery than just giving pills and having 15-minute sessions, right? I mean, it goes into
I
the
think there needs to be. I think there's different levels. I don't think it's like pills should be negated because they can still count. But I definitely think it's important to emphasize recovery and in different places rather than be problem oriented. I mean, it's more about. I definitely think it's good to be solution oriented, but that doesn't mean I still think that medications are a very important piece of things because sometimes it's hard to always know what the best answer is for somebody that's very acute, and sometimes can take the right medication dosage until the person becomes more adjusted, and even then, I mean, that person might need them indefinitely. Sometimes it's only the medication that allows people to participate in those groups to begin with. So
Well, I attribute much of my recovery to medication, so I'm not putting medication down at all. I'm just saying that I think the approach to recovery is like taking on a much more like holistic uh, approach. And I think sometimes that because of I mean, especially since co-ed, so many people have been experiencing anxiety, depression, PTSD from the pandemic, that the system is overwhelmed and is something has to be done. I don't know exactly what it is, but you know, I you, the doctors and the counselors and the therapists are not only doing their best, but they're also getting burned out, and I think that's a very dangerous situation.
yeah, I agree. I mean, it was kind of the case before the pandemic, and I guess it's still pretty. I know it's pretty bad now too, and it's I think it's gotten worse in many ways. But I mean, I guess I know like where I get my treatment currently. They are overwhelmed, and I so um but I it's hard to it's important to I just think treatment should be accessible. I mean, regardless of what goes on, somebody might if they go through something that puts them in trouble or something, and they gotta they should be in a emergency room department or perhaps a hospital, and not have to be in jail. And I think it's more about understanding that sometimes it's more about the person having a mental health issue, and sometimes as you started addressing the issue that the person for the fact that they're having those symptoms, rather than it's completely they're a bad person, and they should be placed in
Right.
jail. You know, there's better outcomes, and I think the more people understand that and destigmatize mental health and understand, like, be able to have compassionate social workers to work with people individually and not stigmatize them for having problems, I really feel that the world can improve. That's how I feel.
Well, I agree with that completely, and I think that I think COVID I mean, this might sound, I don't mean this to be taken the wrong way, but, COVID has had a positive effect on mental illness and mental health issues because all these people who, were so involved in their lives that and they were forced to like just sit in their homes and deal with the issues that came up. So I think a lot more people are like becoming aware of what mental illness is about and what mental illness is about and how to preserve your mental health. Whereas before, people would just look at the movies or the TV shows and say, well, all schizophrenics want to kill people, So, and but not only schizophrenia, but depression and anxiety. I think that the COVID has like had a positive effect on the perception that these are human problems and human situations rather than just isolated problems that happen to people who quote can't cope or whatever.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I remember when the lockdowns were happening a while ago, it was. I remember reading a lot about how people were sort of changing the way they were thinking about mental health and, changing, kind of revolutionized. Almost that there was kind of. I got the impression that there was a bit of people were kind of revolutionizing the way they were thinking about it, and I thought that's great. And I remember I was coming upon some radio programs that were like wow. And For example, um, like Tiffany Warner's program was a great thing that I found that I came about, and the fact that people are really looking to. I mean, it's about communication. It's about understanding there's different points of view out there. I don't think there should be predominance of one thing really, and and definitely, I have some experience in advocating for understanding mental illness itself, but I also because of my peer experience, I also have the understanding that there's the empowerment that's a big part of it. So, and I don't. Sometimes I wonder how is it mutually exclusive to believe in empowerment as well as understanding that mental illness is a real factor, and uh, and I really think that that's an interesting kind of dialectic that might be kind of being addressed right now in some ways. So.
Right. Well, that's a very good point, Dave. And I think we're coming up on our time. So, do you have any like sage advice or any insights that you think would be helpful to share before we end this? Or and uh, what do you have any like great or significant or insights that you've come to that you think could be very helpful to people? Because I'd be interested in hearing them because your experience is like so esoteric and so generalized about these issues that I think people would be very happy to hear what you have to say about like in closing words.
Um, Well, I really think it's important to find that peace within yourself and understand that that's what it's really about. And sometimes but it's definitely important to ask for help. I mean, regardless of, you might be feeling bad, and it's okay to ask for help. And I really believe it's like no matter how you're feeling, if you feel, it's important to make sure that there's important to have people to reach out to, because I know in my experience when I had people to reach out to, it saved my life. So I really hope that people understand how important it is to 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 think it's okay to talk to call a friend, and and open the dialogue with whoever, whether it be a friend or a parent or a teacher. Just talk more about what's going on, since it took so long for us to recognize I had a problem.
Right.
It
Well,
wasn't until, and I had already been through such bad things before that, and I had to be so it's just important to open the dialogue and make sure it's okay.
well, that's the mental health warriors as a group made a group video that's available on Warrior TV for World Mental Health Awareness Day, which was last Sunday, and they reflected that. Most of them reflected that thought too. Is that it's okay to ask for help. If you're asking for help, that doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean you're insecure. It means that you realize and you have the self-awareness that there are problems that you can't fix by yourself. So thank you very much, Dave. And I would just like to say here that the mental health warriors are a growing movement of people and Shakers who are dealing with these issues. And at this point, we're self-funded organizations. So any donations can be would be welcome. There, you can pay at PayPal. You go to MHW MHWarriors19 at gmail.com, and any donations would be welcome. And in the near future, we're going to have Steve Knapp on talking about mindfulness from Australia. And thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the program. Thank you very much, Dave. I really appreciate your insights and your wisdom and your perseverance and your courage in fighting for what you believe. And thank you very much, and have a great night, everybody. And see you next week on Straight, Sane and Sober at 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time and 8 o'clock UK time. So have a great night and good night.